Good morning. We're starting Urban America today and American history. This time period coincides with like the Industrial Revolution and part of the next chapter, which is like the Progressive Era. It's also referred to as the Gilded Age from time to time, and there's actually a section in this chapter about what the Gilded Age is. So we'll get to that shortly. But we're looking at the time period from 1870 to 1910, so roughly after Reconstruction, and we start, the industrialization process until right before, close to before we start becoming a world power and get involved in World War One. So we start this chapter off with immigration because this is a big reason for why the population boomed so big during this time period. So between 1865 and 1914, you have almost 25 million Europeans who are immigrating to the United States. So we have what we call new immigration and old immigration. So before 1865, most of the people who immigrated from Europe were actually from Northern and Western Europe. After 1865, closer to the 1890s, you have more immigrants that are coming from Eastern and Southern Europe, like Italy, Greece, Austria, Hungary, Russia, Serbia, and so on and so forth. So we see a change in like where our immigrants are coming from, and that actually causes us to panic a little bit because we start to see Europeans, a lot of like the Europeans in Southern and Eastern Europe especially, as like more hostile, more radical, because that's where a lot of the revolutions were taking place. You have a lot of like anarchists and like Marxists who are in those locations, that like people who supported him. And so for that reason, we start to get a little like cautious about immigration. So that's what this section is about. So people come to America obviously for like job availability. You can always narrow it down to just better opportunities. They want to avoid forced military services. They want to look for better food prices. Usually their country is way, way overpopulated and there's not enough jobs, there's not enough food, there's not enough resources. And so they look at the United States, and we've got this whole like continent pretty much of North America from sea to shining sea with plenty of opportunities. And so they look at that as a new opportunity to hopefully have a better job or a better, offer their children better lives. Some even try to like escape religious persecution, and then like the class system thing just goes along with like people who are working in these factories and not getting paid or getting paid very little, if nothing at all. And so these people are, for the most part, persecuted in their own countries because they're not able to really fight for rights for the working class. And so you have this like richer kind of upper class that is dominating the country, and people are realizing that like things aren't going to change without violence or some sort of like new legislation or new leaders. And so the easiest way to avoid that is to just completely like leave the country, according to some people. So a lot of the people who came to the United States from Europe come through Ellis Island. Ellis Island is just kind of like a checkpoint where you get tested to see if you have any illnesses. They look and see if you have enough money to come to the United States. They ask to make sure that you have someone to stay with when you come to the United States, so you're not just like homeless on the side of the street. And they eventually start checking for other things as well. We'll get into that. But for the most part, Ellis Island is just a checkpoint, looking to see that you're not like going to be a bad addition to the country. So it's not uncommon for immigrants to be like inspected by a doctor and to be found maybe in need of a second observation. And like these people, maybe they're older, or they like they're out of shape, or they appear to like be a little sick from the 2-week voyage, like sea voyage over. They actually will put them in a cage to the side and mark their coat lapel with like a colored chalk to kind of indicate what they need to be like what they're isolated for and what they need to be kind of like checked for again. And a lot of times these families would come over. You'd have like the mom, the dad, the brother, the sister, maybe like a grandmother. And let's say the grandmother failed inspection. This family might not ever see their grandmother again because they're going to send her back to Europe, wherever she came from. And so it's really like tough. There's a lot of like separation at Ellis Island. There's also a lot of hope that comes with it because, you know, these people, as soon as they realize that they're getting close, they see the Statue of Liberty and they're like, oh, like we have this new opportunity for like peace, for like hope. We're like coming to the land of the free. We're going to actually have an opportunity to like get jobs, this sort of thing. Like, thank God this trip is over. Like, it's time for a new beginning. So you have a lot of people who look at it and they're like very hopeful. And then you have some people who have, you know, tough experiences. So I have a video clip here, the Ellis Island video clip. It's a virtual tour to help put you in the shoes of someone who is traveling to the United States. Because one of your assignments for this is to write a journal entry as a European immigrant coming through Ellis Island. And so that would be very helpful for you to watch. So once people came to the United States, immigrants would come to large cities to look for jobs. So like New York City, Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, they're all like pretty major cities that immigrants come up to. And in those cities, they kind of like huddle together with their own ethnicities. And so if you're Italian, you live in Little Italy. If you're Jewish, you live on the Lower East Side. You know, like there's just different little locations that everybody kind of groups together. And the reason being for that is because you're in a new country where no one speaks your language, no one knows your customs, no one goes to the churches that you go to, no one eats the way that you do. And, you know, like it's comforting because you're surrounding yourself with people who are from the same country that you're from. You have stuff in common with them. You can speak your native language with them, take a break, kind of like rebuild, get some comfort in that as far as like coming to a new country, because it's overwhelming. It's very difficult. A lot of the immigrants who come to the United States could either be really successful or they could fail, depending on how quickly that they were able to learn English. So while living in these ethnic cities is really beneficial for your like morale and to just kind of get your spirits up and make you feel at home and comfortable, it's also it can also hinder you from learning English as quickly or adapting to American culture as quickly. And so that may deter you from like finding a good job or being successful or being able to provide for your family. And this is Little Italy today. So you can see that like there's still, it looks kind of touristy to an extent now. You know, you've got some like shops over here. But for the most part, I mean, you still have like generations of families who have like lived there since they traveled or immigrated from Europe that have like passed down the houses or passed down businesses from generation to generation. Now that's on the East Coast. On the West Coast, there's immigration as well coming from Asia. So you have people who are coming from China and Japan mostly. China's population had grown exponentially large during the mid 1800s. And so there's a lot of unemployment, there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of famine. There's a rebellion that causes a lot of suffering, and like people just start leaving and coming to the United States for like a new opportunity. So the demand for railroad workers also helped because we were wanting the Chinese to help kind of like blast through the mountains to build the transcontinental railroads because, you know, they had built the Great Wall of China. They're looking at them as like these really powerful men who are who are not really even men. They're, you know, they're extreme, they're strong, they're like machines. They're able to like work and do, you know, it's astonishing what they're able to accomplish. And so we actually like advocate for the Chinese to come to the United States for that reason, because we see them as like really good workers. So a lot of them, even though they're working for $1 a day on these rail lines, they aren't making very much money. They're happy to come because it's better than probably what they're experiencing. They probably aren't able to find a job as easily at home. And so those who don't work as like laborers or servants in skilled trades become merchants. And for the most part, you have a pretty large Chinese population in California, even just in the West Coast in general. So Japan also starts immigrating, like a lot of the Japanese start immigrating into the United States between 1900 and 1910. And they're coming for the same reasons. They're looking for more economic opportunities. The Asian immigrants would come. They would come and they would be inspected just like the Europeans were on Ellis Island, only the Asian immigrants would come in Angel Island off the California coast. And they would go through the same kind of like process. They'd be checked to make sure that they were like healthy, well, capable of working, capable of contributing. They had somewhere to stay, that sort of thing. So it's the same kind of situation, just a different island, different inspection, like same inspection process, just a different inspection location. Obviously, it wouldn't make sense for them to go to Ellis Island because that's off the coast of New York. So with these new immigrants coming to the United States, you have an increase of nativism in many Americans. Nativism is just like an extreme like of immigrants, an extreme dislike of immigrants by native-born people. And it's not that you just like don't like people because of the way that they look. You have a reason that you're not liking these people. You may oppose immigration from other countries because you think that it's going to disrupt the balance of religion. It's going to disrupt the economic stability, if you can call it that, in the United States. People have many different reasons for opposing immigration. So some people thought that the influx of Catholics would threaten the Protestant population of the United States. Okay. Labor unions didn't really like immigration because if you were in a labor union and you were advocating for better rights, like better work hours, more pay, and you went on strike, a lot of times these new immigrants would come in and they would just agree to take a job for whatever pay and they'd be happy with it. And so they want to accept jobs as strikebreakers in general. So for the most part, these immigrants are kind of like ruining all of the progress that labor unions are able to like come to. And so it makes sense for why they have these feelings, but obviously it's not positive. It's not great. Like we still have people who feel this way about immigrants today. Like you don't want more immigrants coming to the United States for different reasons, whether it be taking jobs or, not contributing to the economy or being lazy or not necessarily following customs, like whatever, or their religion is different. Like, even though we're supposed to be a tolerant country, you still have these really intense feelings. There's a lot of prejudice against Catholics during this time period as well. So we get this group called the American Protective Association, and it's an anti-Catholic organization. They vow not to hire or vote for Catholics if you're a part of this organization. The Irish suffered the most from the anti-Catholic feeling. Obviously, like a lot of people who immigrated from Ireland are Catholic. But it's because a lot of them are illiterate. They can't read, and they would work like these really low-paying jobs. So like the dominant Protestant population would look at them as like lazy, superstitious, ignorant, and they just didn't really want to be around them at all. Prejudice against immigrants stimulated the passage of a new federal law enacted in 1882 that banned convicts, paupers, and mentally disabled from immigrating to the United States. And then they also placed a 50-cent head tax on newcomers who were coming into the United States, which it doesn't seem like much, but whenever you've literally just sold everything that you own to move to a new country to like get a fresh start, every penny really counts during this time. And so 50 cents could be a deal breaker for some families. So even though I just told you, like the Chinese are coming because we like are inviting them to come to like work, we have what we call the Chinese Exclusion Act that's passed in 1882. So anti-Chinese sentiment would lead to like racial violence sometimes in the West because people would get these like nativist feelings toward the Chinese. And so, like, one person, an Irish immigrant, how ironic that he's like Irish, people hate the Irish in the East, but he's like hating the Chinese in the West. He organizes the Working Man's Party of California to fight Chinese immigration. So then the Chinese Exclusion Act is passed by Congress in 1882, and Chinese immigration was canceled for 10 years. They were like, no more immigration from China, like, this is it. And then it prevented the Chinese who were already in the country from becoming citizens, which is kind of a slap in the face because, like, these people have been living here, working here, contributing, and now they can't be citizens. So the Chinese in the U.S. like tried to fight it. They organized letter writing campaigns. They petitioned the president. They filed suit in federal court, but all of their efforts failed. Congress then renewed the law whenever the 10 years was up in 1892, and they made it permanent in 1902. So they renewed it twice. Well, they renewed it once and then made it permanent, and it's not repealed until 1943. In the middle of World War II, it's not repealed. Then we start allowing Chinese to immigrate into the United States, and we allow them to become citizens. So pretty sorry on our part. So this is the gentleman's agreement is about an agreement between the Japanese and the United States, the San Francisco Board of Education, basically. So on October 11th, 1906, the San Francisco Board of Education are getting a little like racist, and they're going to like segregate all the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean children in their own Oriental school in Chinatown because they don't want them to go to school with the American kids. So Japan is offended, rightfully so, because it's insulting that they're segregating their children and putting them in an Oriental school. The whole point of coming to the United States is to like learn the customs, learn the language, and assimilate, contribute. And so a lot of the Japanese leaders contact Theodore Roosevelt, and he ends up inviting the school board leaders to the White House, and he proposes to limit Japanese immigration. He's like, look, I can talk to the Japanese government. We can limit immigration if the school board will rescind its segregation order. If you'll take that back, then maybe we can just talk about like limiting immigration. And so Japan agreed, and the school board revoked the segregation order. And so we call this the gentleman's agreement because you didn't have like a formal paper or document that anyone signed. It was just kind of like, okay, I trust you, like I'll keep my side of the bargain if you keep your side. And it was kind of like a handshake, like both leaders just had to trust each other to uphold their end of the agreement. So in 1905, Theodore Roosevelt commissions a study on how immigrants are admitted to the nation. The commission recommended an English literacy test. Yeah. So like, let's test everyone in their English skills before they come to the United States. If you can't speak English, then you can't come, is kind of like what they're saying. And then another commission 2 years later says, that's a little harsh. Okay, we'll take it back. Like, how about we do literacy tests in any language for immigration? Okay. So these recommendations reflected the bias of people against the new immigrants who were from like Southern and Eastern Europe, who were mostly illiterate. They mostly can't read, even in their own language. So obviously, like our country and our, congressmen, our leaders see that the immigrants who are coming from Southern and Eastern Europe are illiterate. They're not necessarily the smartest. We should stop them from coming into the United States because they're not going to contribute. And so they literally enact this legislation. Presidents Taft and Wilson both vetoed the legislation because they didn't want that to happen. They knew that that was terrible. Then the legislation eventually passes in 1917 over Wilson's veto. So even though the presidents vetoed it, Congress was able to override the veto. The purpose of the law was to reduce immigration from Southern and Eastern European countries, and it succeeded because it cuts back quite a bit on the immigration from those countries. So the next section in the chapter is about urbanization, which is just kind of like the development of cities and city life, like how people are living. So the native-born Americans and immigrants are drawn to cities by the jobs available in Americans' growing industries. Cool. There's a ton of jobs. They have a ton of opportunities. because you have like these new cities, you have to have like these skyscrapers because people are like, like so many people are moving to cities. They realize that like instead of building out, we need to start building up. So they start building skyscrapers. They start having like, these public transportation systems. Your neighborhoods start to become divided by social class. In a lot of cities, you have what we know as political machines that control the city government. And we'll talk more about that. So after the Civil War, the urban population grows from around 10 million in 1870 to more than 30 million in 1900. So in 30 years, it grows by 20 million. Most of the immigrants who poured into the United States in the 1800s didn't have money to buy a farm or the education to have a higher paying job. So like their only opportunities to get a job were to work in the expanding factories. And so factories are in the cities. Your immigrants move to the cities. It's just the best opportunity. Rural Americans also start moving to cities because farmers are not able to really make as much money in the agricultural industry. So a lot of farmers are moving to urban areas to find better paying jobs and better opportunities for their families as well. So cities had a lot to offer. You got bright lights, you got running water, modern plumbing, museums, libraries, theaters. Living in the city is nice, especially compared to living out in the country in the middle of some fields. You have more opportunities for your family. Things are going to be great. Yeah. And this map actually shows you it's really cool. But it shows you just kind of like how immigration changed and like where people were living, like the changes as far as like the movement from the rural areas to like the more populated city areas. So like you should definitely take a look at it. So like I said, skyscrapers are a big deal because obviously like city populations are growing. You can only grow outward so much. You have to start building up. So the price of land costs more. There's more incentive to build upward rather than outward. And so skyscrapers become a thing. So skyscrapers are just like tall steel frame buildings. Chicago's 10-story home insurance building was built in 1985, and it was the first skyscraper. And Chicago still has like, hundreds and thousands of like awesome skyscrapers to this, now one of the largest cities in the country. I mean, New York City also boasted more skyscrapers than any other city in the world. Still probably true to this day. I mean, for the most part. Louis Sullivan was a Chicago native who contributed to the design of skyscrapers. He's known for a lot of his structures with just like simple lines, like straight lines, spacious windows using plate glass. A lot of the skyscrapers that you see are kind of like his design. So this would be one of his buildings, just like straight lines, windows, nothing really like intricate or detailed, too intricate or detailed. So to move people around the cities, a lot of mass transit develops. You have horse cars as the main force of transportation. In 1873, you start to get cable cars installed in different cities, like San Francisco, for transportation. In 1887, Frank Sprague develops the first electric trolley car. So that's a major, development. In the largest cities, railroads are built above and below ground to make transit off streets. So you get subway systems. The wealthy people, however, have different lives. They live in different parts of town, and they have their own land. They have their own facilities, like they're out on their own. So high society families would have districts, like fashionable districts in the heart of the city. They would construct homes in the styles of their choice. So you would have castles, English manors, French chateaus, Tuscan villas, any kind of design that they wanted. Wealthy women would manage large numbers of servants in these homes, like cooks, maids, butlers, coachmen, nannies, chauffeurs. Like they would have just a grand old time throwing social parties, having different activities at their homes, hosting people. This is Cornelius Vanderbilt's mansion. This is the Breakers mansion, by the way. Here's the Biltmore estate. It's really famous, really popular, the Vanderbilt mansion. The nation's rising middle class included doctors, lawyers, engineers, managers, social workers, architects, and teachers. So you have a lot of people who have degrees in this middle class. It's funny that, like, these are people that make pretty decent money. I mean, not teachers, but anyway. But these are all middle class citizens. Like, middle class citizens move away from the central city and they go to what we call the suburbs. And like they're like, we've got like all this public transportation. Why not just move to the suburbs? We've got ways in and out of the city. It's not like a huge deal. Most middle class families would have like a live-in servant. Must be nice. This allowed the women in the house to pursue activities outside of the home. You'd have women's clubs that were really popular in the middle class that focused on like social, educational events, like charitable and reform activities. So they live decent lives. They're not really as glamorous as like the high class, but still. And then you have the working class. So the working class are like the ones who just kind of get squat on. Few families in the urban working class owned homes. A lot of them would work in like really crowded tenements or apartment buildings. To supplement the average industrial worker's annual income of $445, many families would rent space to a boarder. So like if you had an extra room, you would just rent it out to somebody to like make more money. So Zalman Yaffa was a journalist who lived in a New York tenement as a child, and he recalled, with $1 a day, our mother fed and clothed an ever-growing family. She took in boarders. Sometimes this helped, and other times it added to the burden. Boarders were often out of work and penniless, so how could you turn a hungry man out? She made all of our clothes. She walked blocks to reach a place where meat was a penny cheaper, where bread was a half a cent less. She collected boxes and old wood to burn in the stove. So a lot of these people who live in these, conditions, they're used to it. They're used to like pinching pennies, and they're very resourceful for the most part. It's because they have to be. Meanwhile, you've got people over in the Vanderbilt mansions throwing parties, just having a good old time. Like, hey, would you like some more champagne? How about a little tea cake? How about a coffee cake? Good times. So here's the Vanderbilt tenements. It's about the size of his like mansion that his family just lives in. But hundreds of people here live there. So in the working class, white native-born men earned higher wages than African-American men, immigrants, and women. 64% of working class families relied on more than one wage earner in 1900. And in some cases, the whole family worked, even children, because they didn't have like child labor laws yet. We haven't gotten there yet. Native-born white women typically had more years of education and worked as teachers, or they would do clerical work. So a lot of women would work outside of the family. Domestic service was the largest source of employment for women, though. So basically, like working in the house, serving, doing people's laundry, stuff like that. When people were unable to work, they had to rely on other family members or charity to be fed and taken care of. So when a worker was maimed or killed on the job, you didn't get workers' comp. That wasn't a thing. They probably got fired, actually, and there was no such thing as like retirement or short-term disability or long-term disability or anything like that yet. So a lot of people are kind of like out of luck. It's like, oh, he like broke his arm. He's not gonna be able to work for a few months. Like, great. Another mouth to feed. We're gonna have to work harder. We're gonna have to like take in some extra boarders or something this month to like be able to pay for everything and take care of everybody. Older Americans would live with family members most of the time, or independently, or in homes for the aged. Like, your older Americans didn't really have that retirement to really like fall back on, so they had to rely on other people. So there's a lot of problems that come with urban development. So like, you have more crime, you have more violence, more fire, more disease, pollution. All of these things are like major problems. Crime is a growing problem, and you have a lot of like pickpockets, swindlers, thieves. They like thrive in these urban living conditions because there's plenty of people to like target. So from 1880 to 1900, the murder rate jumps from 25 per million people to more than 100 per million people as well. Alcohol contributes to violent crime in and out of the home. You got a lot of domestic violence. Disease and pollution pose big threats for families who are living in these crowded cities. Improper sewage disposal contaminates the city's drinking water, so you get typhoid fever and cholera as a result because there's poo in your water. Horse manure is left in the streets. That smells lovely. Smoke would belch from chimneys. Soot and ash would accumulate from coal and wood fires. Honestly, it's very polluted, very hard to breathe, bad living conditions for the most part. So your political machine is just an informal political group that's designed to gain and keep power. And they come because cities have so many problems, and like the cities had grown so fast that they're not able, like the governments aren't able to keep up with it. So in exchange for votes, your political machines would like promise to provide jobs. They would promise to provide food and housing and heat and police protection and things like that. So they'd be like, we'll do this if you vote for us. And so a lot of people are able to get power and keep power from those promises. The party bosses who would run the machines would control the city's finances too, though. So they're not just doing it to be good people. They're doing it because they're trying to take advantage of the money that the city's bringing in. So a lot of these politicians get rich because they're, being fraudulent, or they're grafting. When you graft, you get money through dishonest or questionable means. So George Plunkett is one of these main ones, and he defended what he called honest graft. So a politician might find out in advance where a new park was to be built and buy the land near the site and then sell the land to the city for a profit. So he says, I see my opportunity and I take it. So what? Like, no big deal. Fraud occurred when party bosses accepted bribes from contractors who were supposed to complete fairly to win contracts to build streets, sewers, and buildings. A lot of corrupt bosses would also sell permits to their friends to operate public utilities like railroads and waterworks and public power systems. It's insane. But like, whenever their friends are like running everything, they're able to kind of like have their hand in all the different parts. It's almost like a monopoly over the entire city. So is how I would think of it. And this is George Plunkett and a nice little meme for you. He was an honest Tammany man. So he's part of Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall is one of the largest New York City political machines. It's the most infamous. William Bosch Tweed was the leader. His corruptness eventually leads to a prison sentence in 1874. So he does get caught. But city machines often controlled all city services, including the police department. So it's really like, insane that he even got caught. Opponents of political machines blasted bosses for their corruption. Their defenders would people would argue that machines are providing services and they're helping to assimilate the masses. They're actually providing services to the city dwellers. So what if they're swindling money in the process? They're taking care of the city. So you have a lot of people who would, talk crap about them. Then you have a lot of people who would support them because they're trying to take care of the urban population. So this is Bosch Tweed. As long as I count the votes, what are you going to do about it? Say. So, he's like sitting at the ballot, you vote. You vote and he'll count the votes and let you know who wins. Basically, he's going to keep his job as much as he can. So I'm going to stop here at the Gilded Age, and I'll pick back up on this next week so that I have plenty of time to record for you. But as always, email me if you have any questions or, concerns for the most part. I want you to comment or like so that I can see that you saw this video so that I can add some bonus points to your test grade for this chapter. If you hear this or if you're paying attention, you get that opportunity. So thanks.